A movie so good, it saved the first one. It's been said that Dune 2, or Dune Part 2, is a cinematic triumph in every way imaginable, from visuals to storytelling to an overall grand atmosphere, and I'm gonna be honest here, it's hard for me to disagree with all that. While this movie does continue the story, it does so much more to elevate the story and its characters. It moves along so much. To begin, we understand why Paul is such a polarizing figure. In the complicated world that is religion, one people's Messiah is another world's Doombringer. And that is exactly who Paul doesn't want to be. And I think that's one reason why I like Paul in the second story. In the first part, he felt like he was just along for the ride. He was a passive protagonist. Things just kept happening to him. He just existed. Whereas in part 2, he takes charge of his own fate. He's actively trying to join the Fremen, and is scheming with his mother to take powerful roles within the Fremen world. Paul doesn't want to be the Messiah, but destiny calls upon him, whether he wants to be or not. Along the way, Paul's friendships and relationships flourish. He's reunited with Gertie, his father's former right-hand man. He grows to be more and more part of the Fremen as he learns their ways, and even learns how to ride a sandworm. So for a second, I want to talk about Stilgar and the danger that he presents. Not necessarily as someone who believes that Paul is the Messiah, that's fine. It's the fanaticism that we see with Paul coming forward as the Messiah and people blindly following him rather than questioning, are we doing the right thing? They believe because the Messiah says it's good, it must be good. Not putting any morals there. It's a problem. Not just in the story, but in religion in general. People blindly following religion is a bad thing. Let's talk about Psychopath, and to be exact, Austin Butler's Fade. Food. I'm gonna call him Austin Butler. This guy feels like a rival to Paul, which is kind of cool to me. Jesus never had a rival, as far as I'm aware. The idea that the Bene Gesserit, the evil-looking nuns, are actively trying to pull strings from the shadows. It makes sense that they would want to keep their options open, but it also makes sense that the quote-unquote true Messiah wouldn't necessarily come at a time of their choosing. Austin Butler then takes on the planet of Arrakis, successfully leading the bad guys in a warpath, destroying the northern half of the planet, taking it for themselves. Ultimately, Paul pulls the sword from the stone, that's a reference, and drinks the life water. He survives, becoming Space Jesus and leading the Fremen on a warpath back north. Behind door number 3, we have the current king and his daughter. In part 1, the king ordered the killing of the House of Atreides, thus condemning Paul's father to death. All these storylines culminate in some great action pieces that involve massive battles between the Fremen versus everybody. And even the worms get involved, which, let's be honest, that's kind of cool. Ultimately, Paul takes the planet. With other armies in orbit, Paul threatens to nuke his own planet and destroy all the spice, which, as we all know, is literally the one finite resource that the entire universe wants and needs. Paul challenges the king to a death match, with Paul representing himself, while the king chooses a psychotic killer in Austin Butler to be his champion. Their knife fight is pretty entertaining. Also interesting when they begin to discuss being cousins and what that means. Both young men realize the gravity of the situation, but still proceed to fight. Paul wins, and with that, he is the uncrowned king of the Empire, with the other houses refusing to acknowledge him.
Acknowledge me.
Paul says the worst possible thing that he could: show them paradise, thus starting the holy war that will cost billions their lives. One subject I haven't really touched on yet, and also side note, damn, this movie is filled with so much content. One thing I haven't really talked about yet is the relationship between Paul and Chani. They go through it all. From her looking at him as an outsider to giving him a chance to truly respect their customs, she falls in love with him, either because of who he currently is and because of who he doesn't want to be. By the end of the film, Paul must seek a strategic marriage with the Emperor's daughter to ensure power? Yeah, something along those lines. Obviously, Chani is not okay with this, but she's been losing the Paul that she knew for a while now. Also, can we talk about the scale of this movie and the CGI? It felt properly huge, and CGI wasn't really abused. I don't want to say despairingly, but it felt like a massive scope of a story, and that's refreshing, something refreshing to see. I think it's also interesting and worth noting the fact that Paul actually has a rival, someone who is the polar opposite of him, but that can also represent the quote-unquote Messiah, someone that can be controlled though by the Bene Gesserit. These are all just interesting things. This all reeks of old school Arthurian lore. And it makes sense that this world is set in such a place. We have people that are loyal to their houses to a fault, loyal to their kings or who they represent, their dukes, if you will. And don't get me wrong, I don't think they're trying to hide the fact that they're Arthurian inspired. It's interesting to me, and I like that. It's the first modern story that I've seen in a very long time that uses those tropes, those elements, and it's actually pretty good. In another world, in a different time, I once criticized the first Dune for being boring, bland, and not making much sense. I stand behind those criticisms at the time because Dune 2 did such an amazing job of explaining so many concepts and ideas that I went back and rewatched Dune 1, saw how great it was, and understood everything they were talking about. But it took the second film for that to happen. I stand by that criticism, but I will say this, Dune 1 is a lot more impressive looking back at it. One person said, this must be what it felt like the first time Star Wars came out. And I don't know if I'd go that far, but this was definitely a massive story and a great film that harkens back to stories of old. Knights, religion, figures pledging their loyalty to a figure of great power. The story of a chosen one has been done a million times. But the fact that Paul knows what the endgame is, with billions dying, and he still does it? Well, he feels a little more like a tyrant than a hero already. This movie is an A for me, but what do you think? Go ahead and let us know down below, we'd greatly appreciate it. And are you looking forward to Dune Part 3 that will come out probably in like 2028? JK, I don't know for sure, but, you know, maybe?